but this is the
Okay.
Free Minds podcast. We're coming at you. What is this? Season 2, episode 10?
Episode 10, and it's a
Diaz?
different Diaz, and it's the first Skype one.
Yeah, we're on Skype now. We're going, it's not international yet, but I mean, California to Atlanta. That's a pretty big leap.
Absolutely.
So we have me, Trey Jackson, and then we also have
You have John Nichols here.
John Nichols, my co-host, usually always reliable. My cat's here, and then we also have our guest this week is Simone Wright. She is an author of the book First Intelligence, and she's also a coach. And I don't know, you can kind of get into what you do if you want to just pop on for a second, like high level. Simone?
Who, me? Oh,
Yeah.
me, high level?
You, yeah.
High level. High level. Yeah, I'm a coach. I'm a teacher. I'm an intuitive consultant. I have done work intuitively for police departments, missing children's cases, homicide cases. Take that I take that expertise and teach business people, spiritual leaders, entrepreneurs, CEOs, doctors, how to develop that intuitive sense. I'm also an artist and an author. I live in LA. I'm working on a project right now with the Hubble Space Science team and NASA. We're doing a big international art show scheduled for 2020 in Pasadena to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Hubble Space Telescope. So I dabble in a lot of things, and I'm always sort of looking for ways to expand the intuitive process and the creative process and figure out ways to play in the ability to materialize and create stuff in the physical. So a bit of everything, really.
I like that you said play with it as opposed to make it work, right?
Yes, yes, yeah. Well, the idea of play is so essential to the process, right? Because if you're in the work of it, you kind of, I call it kinking the energetic hose.
Mhm.
So the more fun you can have with it, even the more fun with the idea of getting it wrong, the
Mhm.
more dependable it becomes. So yeah, it's play for me for sure.
Cool. So usually at the start of this, we'll just kind of like dive into, well, the podcast itself is kind of about remembering the authentic self, which
Hmm.
I feel like goes really hand in hand with what you're doing. I mean, I guess your slogan or whatever is remember who you are.
Yeah.
Um, and for me as a person, it took me a long time to realize I don't have to be my patterns in my head. I don't have to be blaming my parents for who I quote unquote am.
Hmm.
But also, there's a very intuitive part of me that you can't really touch or feel, but you can know, and
Yeah.
it's always a feeling. It's hard to make it tangible, which makes it hard
Yes.
for people to, and then it's really cool that you do the business stuff because it's hard for people to move something intangible and make it concrete and real, and then be like, this is applicable in any as facet of life that I want to bring it to.
Yeah.
So where I guess where did this kind of start for you, this journey of like diving into the self and being like, well, who am I really and what does that mean for my life and me as an individual, but the world too.
Right. Well, I mean, for me, this sort of intuitive journey started when I was really little. It started when I was a child, just sort of having this multidimensional awareness, psychic abilities, sensitivities, the ability to see dead people and talk to the dead. Like when the movie The Sixth Sense came
Yeah.
out, I was like, my people, those are my people. And so The Sixth Sense kind of jokingly uh, gave me permission to sort of out myself. Um, but I was always creative as a kid. I hated school.
Mhm.
Uh, I thought my teachers were all um, didn't know as much as I did, particularly because not because I was, an arrogant child, because I wasn't. I was very shy. I was very withdrawn. I was and continue to be an introvert. Um, but I just knew things that other people didn't know, and I was raised in Catholic schools, and so I would challenge the nuns and I would challenge the priests, and I'd be sitting in church and I'd lean over to my mom and I'd go, "Mom, that's not right. Like what he's saying, that's not right." And so I would get punished, I would get grounded, I would get detention, I would get into all sorts of trouble. So these natural gifts, and I'm hesitant to call them gifts because everybody's
Yeah.
got them. But these natural tendencies, these natural skills that we've all got, they were quite active in me as a kid. But because I would be punished for them, my true nature was suppressed. Um, so I really, my true nature was this intuitive, creative, um, willful, rebellious kid, and that wasn't safe and that wasn't allowed. So I really, really shut it off. And then so it was shut off really through most of my teenage years and into my 20s, and it wasn't until my mid 20s that it really sort of started to explode. I was having a quarter life crisis, and it just it exploded and to a point where I was in so much pain, and I sort of cried out to the universe. I said, "Why does life hurt so much?" And the voice that I heard, or the message that I got, it said, "Because you've forgotten who you are, and this is not who you are. This pain that you're feeling and all of this shutdown that you're experiencing isn't real." And so in that moment, it was like, okay. And there was nothing else after that. It was like, okay, so the mission became, all right, if this isn't who I am, who am I? And that question led to everything. It led to everything, the next 25 years of my life.
Right. So I let's start like with the quarter life crisis, because I feel like if things are going good, we're not gonna try to remember, right? Things have to be falling apart. With me and my hand injury, or with anyone that's just kind of looking for more meaning, we won't really actually dive deep into it, it seems like, until we have no choice. It's just like, I don't have another option, and I know that there is something else out there. I know that I'm more than just these limitations that I've kind of created for myself, right? So how did you start going about making it normal to be using intuition? Because like you said, we all have it. It's all accessible to anybody. So it's almost kind of weird to call it a gift.
Yes, and that's why I'm hesitant. And Trey, you and I have talked about this before, that whenever I'm coaching somebody or teaching somebody, I say, I want you to really sort of embrace the idea that it's not a gift. It's as normal to you as digestion. It's as normal to you as breathing or having a thought. And when you're able to sort of perceive this skill set as normal, then it becomes something that that you're less inclined to sort of put up on a pedestal. People talk spiritually about the whole idea of, limiting ego, and, you ought to be really careful about ego. Well, I say, okay, if this is a natural gift, then ego doesn't get involved.
Right.
But the quarter life crisis was, I had been dating a guy for 5 years, and we broke up, and I was waiting tables, and it was not how I envisioned my life to be. I'd come to Los Angeles to be an actor, and just, can I use real language on the podcast? Because Trey, you know me,
all about that.
I speak for real. Okay, cool.
Cool
my life was going to hell in a handbasket. Everything was shit blowing sideways, and it was just the biggest clusterfuck you'd ever seen, in my own experience. And I went home for Christmas. I was living in Los Angeles. I went home for Christmas, and had gone to visit the cemetery. My dad died when I was 7. And I went to the cemetery and just had it out with him. It was screaming and having snot bubbles like, "Daddy, why did you leave me? And you left me in this life, and who's going to walk me down the aisle?" And I was just having this, existential crisis in the middle of St. Mary's Cemetery, screaming to the ether. And in that moment, it was like something cracked open. And all of my intuitive skill sets and all of my psychic rememberings flew back. And in that moment, I heard my dad say, "I've been here the whole time. You just weren't listening." And in that moment, it was like, oh my gosh, I've just blown open the portal to something. And everything in that moment became very still. It was like, I was sitting outside, but it was like all the oxygen in the room had been sucked out. It was so still. And I really caught an awareness of it. I thought, what is this? And it was so present, and it was so powerful, and it wasn't high vibrational at all. You hear people talk a lot about in spiritual stuff that it's all high vibrational and it's love, and it wasn't. This moment was very powerfully empty. And it only lasted for about 30 seconds. And in that moment, I said, I want to figure out a way to exist in that place as often as I can. And then it became living life and learning to master life to such a degree that I could be in that place as often as possible. And part of that was coming out of the closet with my intuitive skill sets
Mhm.
and
So
not hiding it anymore.
yeah, and we hide it from ourselves too, I think, right?
Oh, for sure.
So and even for me and for John, just like learning how to incorporate this stuff, and when nobody around us is really talking about intuition and stuff, meditation's getting more acceptable, right? But
Mm-hmm.
meditation can give you access to intuition and that
Sure.
stillness, I guess. So maybe
Yeah.
that intuition's the next step. So I'm kind of curious how you started to bring it. I guess how you started to be like, it doesn't matter if nobody else believes in this, because I know it's real and I don't need any external validation to support me in that. I don't need to be like, hey, I had this experience, and then have somebody come at you and talk about that experience. Be like, well, maybe you were experiencing this and it probably wasn't real or whatever. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I had to break, like you said, breaking patterns, energetic habits. I had to break the pattern that had been developed in me at a young age of fearing my skill set or thinking that I would be punished for having it. So I had to sort of develop, and I say this about the intuitive mindset, that in order to live an intuitive life, you can't be a sissy. You have to be really brave. You have to be really courageous. That this intuitive life is not built for, it's not built for pussies. And so you I had to really be courageous and say to people, and I started it with my closest friends, guys, I know maybe I haven't talked to you about this, but I see dead people. And my closest friends were all like, well, Simone, of course, we've always known there was something, weird about you. And we love you anyway. And, we've always known, and we're just surprised it's taken you so long to sort of say it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started with the people who I knew wouldn't reject me. Um, and then it felt safer and safer to stretch that boundary. And then that's when I sort of started to, go out and teach intuition and travel, and the word sort of spread. And ultimately, it led to one of my longtime friends who was a police detective. And then he said, do you want to come and do some stuff for us? And I did. And that was another whole level of coming out of the closet, because you're in this world of people who are, like you said, business people, rational,
Mm-hmm.
logical, just the facts. And so that was a really big leap. And so it was just slow increments of stepping into an unfamiliar place and establishing a sense of safety in that place,
Mm-hmm.
and then taking another step, and then taking another step to now it's just like, yeah, I talk about all sorts of things and I don't really care what people think.
Right.
Love me or don't, I don't really care.
So what does intuition mean to you?
All right.
Intuition to me, I call it the first intelligence. So my book is called First Intelligence.
Okay.
And it's an inherent natural ability to use our human biology, our human nature, in addition to our spiritual nature, our energetic nature, to gather information from the field of energy that exists all around us and use it for the highest level of survival. For, at its basic root, intuition, gut instinct, you hear people talking about gut instinct. At its root, gut instinct is survival at its basis. It's yes or no, stop or go, live or die, right or wrong, good or bad. But at its more expanded and refined and powerful and exalted levels, it's all right. How can I shape my career so that I can be a global spiritual influencer? How can I transform my health so I can defeat this disease that's got me grounded? How can I transform my relationship with my children, with my loved ones, so that I can be in service in the world, so that I'm not raising assholes? How can I, how can I use my skill set to become the best of me? So it serves all of those levels. It's not just a one shot. It's not just a one thing. It's this multifaceted intelligence that, if you learn how to refine it, can keep you alive in a dark alley like it did with the police officers, or it can help you build a business. So that's how I view it. It's a cool
Awesome.
thing.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Go ahead, keep going.
I was just going to say, and it gets stronger and stronger the more you practice. you know,
Like a muscle.
like a muscle. It's like a muscle. And I call it a language. It's a language. Intuition is a language of energy and feeling and sensation. And it's an equation of energy plus information. And just like learning Spanish or learning Chinese or learning Mandarin, at the beginning, you're going to suck. And you're going to want, you're going to want to ask somebody for a beer but you're saying, excuse me, where's the toilet? So at first it's going to feel like that. But over time, the more you envelop yourself in it, the more you saturate yourself in it, the more natural it becomes. And then you start to perceive the world intuitively. And the whole dynamic of reality changes.
So you mentioned practice. Is there any quick tips or anything that you can give to our viewers that help you practice? Or
well, Trey had mentioned at the beginning, meditation is really important. Learning to still the mind, learning to recognize what patterns of thought are yours, which patterns of thought have been given to you, which patterns of thought you inherited, and starting to recognize the way certain thoughts or energies feel in your body. That's, meditation is a slate cleaner, right? It's like if your mind is a whiteboard, meditation is the eraser that allows you to clean off the whiteboard. And so then when you're working intuitively, so meditation is where I always say, start there. Just learn to get still. You don't have to get perfectly silent, because that's kind of hard. But just still-ish. Still-ish is a good place to start. And mastery in the intuitive process doesn't come from having your mind completely shut off. It comes from the ability to sort of wrangle the mind so that you can capture it and direct it. So meditation is the first place that I start. And, any kind of meditation practice works. And I hear this from my male clients and my guy friends all the time. They'll say, when I was shaving, I got this really cool intuitive hit, like this idea. And I was like, but I wasn't even meditating. I was shaving. I'm like, yeah, but what does your mind do when you're shaving? Like, your mind isn't really focused on anything. You've shaved so many times that your mind, well, Trey, with the exception of Trey, perhaps. But you get what I'm saying, like brushing your teeth, or, you're in a place where your mind isn't really focused on anything. And it's in that stillness that these intuitive hits start to pop in. So that's where I'd start. And then I'd also suggest having a clear target, having a clear goal, having a clear vision for what it is that you want your intuition to guide you towards. There's a really, the common misconception in the spiritual New Age is that people say, I'm just going to let the universe decide to bring me my life. And I just want to grab people when they say that and say, snap out of it. Because if you do that, your intuition doesn't have a target. It doesn't have a goal. It doesn't have a place to go look into the field to find you what you want. It's like the GPS in your car, right? And so if you don't give your intuition a strong target, you'll just sit there. So I always say you need to be precise in where you want your intuition to go. What do you want to shape? What is your vision for the future? You choose one. Pick. Mm-hmm. And the universe isn't keeping some big secret from you. Pick, right? This is the power of having free will, right? You get to choose. And then based on having that quiet foundation and a good solid target, then paying attention to how your perception is altered, and the little nudges and the feelings and the sensations and the dreams or the ideas that you experience, and then follow them, even if they don't make any conscious or rational sense. So those are the 3 steps of the intuitive process as I see it. It's peace, generating your meditative quiet, precision, establishing a strong target, and perception, following the directions. And that gets you where you want to go.
And I like an analogy you used when you were working with me. You kind of talked about how your GPS, you're going from LA to New York, and there's about 18 trillion different ways you can get there. Yeah. So if it doesn't look like you're going in the right direction, you just kind of have to feel it out, because you're probably still going to wind up at that destination, but maybe you have to go off the beaten path to learn something different. For like me, I thought I was on the right path, and then I started having all these roadblocks in life,
Hmm.
like my apartment flooding and all this stuff, and then me not being able to work with my apartment complex because they wouldn't listen to me. And in reality, I kind of eventually figured out a lot of people have been kind of screwing me over lately, and I haven't been asserting myself and setting any boundaries when that's been happening. I
Hmm.
haven't been fighting. I haven't been, working for it. And if I want to move to this destination in my vision, in my mind, then I'm going to have to start having this personality of being able to set boundaries with people. That has to
Yeah.
exist, which is
Yes.
why that stuff I assume was coming up, even though it felt like I was going the wrong way, right?
Right. Right. And that's another, that's another really powerful learning platform for somebody who is trusting their intuition. um, is that again there's sort of this misconception that in order to be spiritual or to follow your intuition, that your heart needs to be wide open and you're not supposed to have any boundaries, and you're just supposed to, your heart's just to be supposed to be open to everything, and you're supposed to love everyone and everything, and that
Mhm.
can be very dangerous and risky, because people who, everybody's intuitive, everyone,
Mhm.
even the people who don't know they're intuitive. And so if you have no boundaries, the people in the world who like to take advantage of people with no boundaries will show up, right?
Mhm.
And so as a person who's intuitive, when we're working with our intuition, we go, okay, I have very, very firm boundaries. And I know, and it's gotten stronger. It's like, who do I want? Who do I want in my life? What is the level of excellence that I want in the people around me? And the level of excellence as a target, for your intuition, you say, okay, the level of excellence that I want around me is, you determine it's so high. Like, I am surrounded by excellent people, and I'm surrounded by excellent opportunities, and I'm surrounded by excellent money, and I'm surrounded by excellent chocolate. For me, that's
Yeah.
a personal thing. And, and I'm surrounded by this level of excellence, and those become your boundaries, right? And if anything that is not in alignment with that level of excellence bumps into you, it's like, the image that's coming to mind right now is the game we might have played when we were little, Operation. When you had the you
Mhm.
had the little,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
if you hit the edge, it would buzz, right? Like, "Ah!" So if somebody or something that's not in alignment with that boundary of excellence, your system buzzes. It's like, "Ah, no, delete, delete. Have a nice life. It's nice to know you, but no, you are so not invited. And so when you have these moments where you're having people violate your boundaries and it feels weird, you're like, okay, something in me, maybe I haven't established a high enough level of excellence. Not everybody is welcome in
Right.
this field, right? And that, for a mystic or an intuitive, that level of excellence needs to be really refined. And because people will sniff your sensitivities out and they'll try to take advantage of it. Um, it's just the human nature, right? There's
Mhm.
there's a draw to that. They feel something in you,
Well,
want a piece of it.
and is part of it because they don't know they're connected to, we'll call it source energy, but
Hmm.
an infinite supply of energy. So they're like, well, since I don't have my own energy, I have to get it from somebody else.
Yep.
That person's heart is open. I can use
Yes.
them.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. They don't know why they're doing it, but there's a magnetic pull, right? And especially because most spiritual people, their hearts do tend to be open because they want to be in service to the world. They want to help people, and so they're like, "Oh, I'm so wide open." But if your heart is wide open, that, think of it like it being a dam, like a water dam, and the energy of a heart that's wide open, source energy is coming in and blowing straight through you, and so you don't have then access to use that resource. You can't then channel it or focus it or move it into your money or move it into your body or move it into your career, because it's just coming in and moving out.
Hmm.
And that flow is attractive to people who can't master their own energy. So boundaries have to be a really important thing when you're using your intuition, for sure. Really crucial. It doesn't
And
mean you become a bitch or a douchebag. It just, you become very, very, very aware
Mhm.
of what's allowed and what's invited and what isn't.
Very perceptive. Um, so, and when you say like build a roadmap to your life, what I've been kind of figuring out is like it's not usually like words. It's not. I mean, it can be a phrase. Affirmations, I suppose, do work, but it
Hmm.
feels more toward the feeling. Um,
Hmm.
and the other thing I've noticed is if I'm trying, say I'm in self-hate and I hate myself, and I'm trying to move to self-love. If I immediately try to go to self-love, I usually break because
Yep,
my body, my nervous system can't handle that yet, right?
exactly. Yep,
And
brilliant.
some people call it, I guess, spiritual bypassing, but it's just,
When you jump,
and
yeah.
let me know if that doesn't make sense, John, but it's just like my psyche cannot handle loving myself if I've been hating myself in my head for so many years. It's like does not compute kind of. And then you
Yeah.
have a breakdown.
Yeah, yeah, that energy, and that's why a lot of spiritual people who are working hard in the spiritual adventure, they burn out because or they suffer fatigue or they have nervous breakdowns or their life really collapses in a hard way because they're trying to run two separate programs and they haven't neutralized or integrated the first program, the self-hate, and they're trying to run all this love. And so the love comes into the system and slams into the self-hate and then bounces off
Mhm.
and causes this, it's like an electrical storm in the psyche. Like you'd said, that's a good word, psyche. Um, and that integration is so important as we do this work because it's what clears the field to give you greater access to the intuition.
Can we talk about clearing that field, knowing how we do that? And I know we can talk about peace and power if we want to, or like how the human body is kind of a battery, but how do we get, if we're so heavy in these patterns of emotions that we've never dealt with, that have been
Hmm.
buried forever and they're coming up and we don't know what to do with them, or if we've had negative thought patterns all our life and we sit down and meditate and we're like, wow, I really don't like myself. How do we like slowly start to move towards a place that's, you can call it high vibration or whatever, but it's just at a place where we can actually be in touch with our intuition? How do we start to move towards that if we've been in these heavy patterns so long? How do we start to move towards the lighter patterns so that we can just be in tune most of the time?
Well, you have to give yourself permission to have them, first of all, number one. Um, so we are we are both human, are in our human nature. We live in a physical skin suit, and we are also spiritual. And a lot of people are saying, I just want to be the spiritual part of me and I just want to be love and light. But that's not going to fly because we live in the 3D world and we need the human body to do shit here. So the first thing we do is we say, okay, half of me is human, half of me is spiritual. I'm willing to accept that. And within my human nature, there is sadness and rage and guilt and anger and and horniness and greed and selfishness and there's this big huge long list. And the moment we are okay with accepting that within ourselves, then the electrical charge on those parts of our identity start to soften. And it's also important to remember that whenever you raise, whenever I don't like to use the word raise, but whenever you amplify your power, you're going to bump into those things. Every time you have an upgrade in power, you're going to slam into those resistances. Um, and so the first stage is, okay, I know that within myself, and this happened to me. I taught a retreat last spring in the California redwoods, and on the first night of the retreat, I had said, as I'd set my prayer, my intention, I said, okay, I want an upgrade in power. This is my prayer for myself in the retreat as I was teaching it. That night, I went to bed and I had a dream that I met an old boyfriend, the same one actually that caused the quarter life crisis. But I met an old boyfriend, him on the street, and I came up behind him. This is all in a dream. And I grabbed him by the back of the head. I threw him down to the ground and I slammed his head into the cement until his brains were splattered all over the road. And this dream woke me up. And I
Yeah.
was like, what the fuck was that? And then I remember my mystical training. Every time you ask for an up level in power, you're going to slam into some shadow. And that was a hardcore slam. So I said, okay, what is in me? Murderous rage. All right. And so I sat in bed for 15 minutes and I just talked. I had this experience with my murderous rage. And I don't, who knows if it came from a past life. I'm sure there was a lot of it rooted to my own trauma as a sexual abuse survivor, who had been molested when I was young and then raped again when I was 12. So there's, and then there's DNA, and then there's, all sorts of women and all sorts of stuff. So I'm like, okay, I don't care where that comes from, but it's there. And so I just sat with it, and the murderous rage came out, and it was like all of this like energy as it was moving through me, and it got to the point where I'd given it so much room to move and express itself that by the time this conversation was over, I was laughing. Oops, sorry. Just lost you. Are you there?
Yep, we're good. Yeah.
Where'd I go? We're good. Am I still there? Sorry, guys.
Yep.
Where'd we go? Sorry, I dropped you. Got so excited about my murderous rage that I couldn't handle the phone.
I noticed right when the energy went up that happened, but yeah.
Yes. So, but it got to the point that I was excited. I was happy to have identified this murderous rage. And so now I can talk about being the spiritual person who has identified her murderous rage and have no shame about it. It's like, yeah, I have murderous rage. I splattered my ex-boyfriend's brains all over the cement in a dream. So does that, and so now that energy in me, there's no conflict in me. It's been integrated. So when you've integrated that power, then intuition and source energy then you're a wider hose. You're a wider hose, and you're not carrying that stuff around with you subconsciously. So I always say, pay attention to those things. Pay attention to the bizarre, distorted dreams that you have and be like, what kind of message is that for me? How can I dive into that and meet that part of myself so that I'm not rejecting any part of me? So now I gleefully can say, oh yeah, I'm a spiritual teacher who has embraced her murderous rage. And so, and in that, people are like, oh, that's really interesting. Where do I have murderous rage? Where do I have those tendencies? How can I meet that part of myself? And then it becomes a game. Again, play.
Yeah.
So that's John's face is like, what? She has murderous rage? What? She slammed some brains? What?
Some power in it.
Yeah, it is. And then Trey, you talk a lot about that in your first book. And and you talk about how your dreams kind of led you to where you are now.
Yeah, they definitely made me realize there was something more going on than just the human experience, and validated it a lot. For the murderous rage stuff, it sounds like it's just most people reject like half of who they are, and that shrinks their energy channel. Because if we're all human and we all have this reptilian brain, then we have survival mode. And sometimes survival mode can turn into murderous rage. But it's just like, if everything's negative, positive, it's just a part on the pole. And if we get rid of that part on the pole, then we're cutting out part of ourselves.
Exactly.
So nothing really is good or bad. And we've even done an episode on that, how nothing's good or bad. And when we can embrace the whole thing, then we have access to the whole, all of our potential energy, whatever you want to call it.
Right. Well, I mean, and the world herself and our experience in the 3D world is a reflection of that, right? Like the reality of Earth is she's fine. The underlying core of what's going on this planet is at the root, the Earth is fine. All of the nuttiness that we see in the world is a projection of all of these shadows that nobody has integrated. So, the deforestation and pollution and child sex slavery and all that other stuff is a projection of these things. And the more we understand that, like the more, if everybody on the planet were to willingly embrace their murderous rage, it would transform overnight. The place would just everything would shift. And especially in the United States where so much is suppressed, especially in our social media culture where it's you're either on one side of the pole where you're all, God help me, you're all Kardashian-y and everything is perfect and you're just this vision of perfection, surgically or otherwise. And then on the other side of the coin, you're hanging out in, life sucks and Donald Trump is the Antichrist, and we're all going to hell in a handbasket, and we need to take money from the rich to feed the poor, and it's just like, so all of that is a reflection of that rejected inner being, and the healing is in that integration. And when you recognize that and you're not afraid of it, like murderous rage was probably the darkest place I could go.
Mm-hmm.
And I've met it and I'm not afraid of it. So really anything else that shows up is kind of gravy.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
So,
John.
yeah, Trey, I don't know where you wanted to go from here, but I'm really fascinated. I really want to hear about how you use intuition with the police department. You said, talked about missing people's cases and homicides, but yeah, can you talk about the work you do with police departments?
Yeah. Well, we talked before about having a target, and when I'm working with law enforcement, well, let me back up. So I was teaching an intuition class up in Canada, which is where I'm from, and that's where I grew up. And I was coming back to Los Angeles from this shop, and I had a layover, and a friend of mine who is this police detective, he knew I was in town, and he said, I'm coming to pick you up. I was at my hotel. I said, I'm coming to pick you up. I'll be there in 2 hours. I'm taking you to a scene. And that's all the information he gave me. And in that moment, I knew that the numbers 3 and 3 popped into my head, and I knew that there were multiple deaths. So he came to my hotel. He picked me up. We drove to this spot at a little restaurant in town, and he said, I'll pick you up in 10 minutes. Go do whatever it is that you do, and I'll be back. So he went away, and I sort of I ordered some food to go, and I walked around the shop and waited for my stuff and got pictures in my head of a gang shooting. There were 3 victims. There were 3 shooters. I saw the order of the shots, who took the shots first. There was somebody else. There was a guy waiting in a car outside, and was able to see the guns that were used and where they were hidden and all this other stuff. So my friend picked me up. I said, I flashed the number 3, and he said, yeah. And so we went back to his office, and he debriefed me. And so I told him what I saw. And he said, that's pretty good. You've got everything. You've got 95% accuracy, everything that we know, and you've even got holdback, which is stuff that the cops know but nobody else knows. And he said, so that's pretty impressive. And he said, do you want to do this for us full time? And I said, fuck no.
Yeah.
No, because I see all of that and I feel all of that, and I'm like, no. I like, my life motto is puppies, ponies, and Porsches in the sun. It's like, no, thank you, no. Said, but what if I could teach you guys how to do what I do? And so I then developed this program to teach the cops how to do what I do. So that was sort of the big case that launched me. Prior to that, some friends of mine who knew I was intuitive. One of them had a child go missing, and so they told their police friends about me, and they called me, and then they referred me to some of the FBI agents, and so I was able to sort of see where the kids were, and give them landmarks and give them identification on one of the kids in one of the situations had dyed his hair. He was a brunette and he had turned his hair platinum, and I'm saying he's blonde, and they're like, no, he's got dark hair. I said, no, he's blonde. And so when he finally showed up, based on the information, he had dyed his hair. So the cops were like, oh, she wasn't wrong there.
Mm-hmm.
And then there have been other times in missing children's cases where the children are dead, they're deceased, but in any of those situations, the target is always the same. So with a missing kid, the target is to bring the kid home. And again, there's a precision in that. So the target isn't to bring the kid home alive, because I don't know if the kid is dead or alive. The target is to bring the child home. And so the goal is I want to bring the child home. If the child is alive, that's great. If the child is dead, well, at least the kid is still home.
Mm-hmm.
And that just was too much for my sensitive nature, because I feel everything, I sense everything. It's again this idea of boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't do that anymore. I prefer to be in service to teach people how to do it for themselves.
Yeah.
And I've got some psychic detective friends who they just suck the marrow out of doing that. They love to go in and be, psychic bloodhounds and find dead bodies. And I really had to really nip it in the bud. I really decided to not do it anymore when one of my police officer friends called me up and said, "Simone, we found a leg. Can you help us find the rest of the body?" And I was like,
Oh,
guys, no.
Yeah.
But I can set you up with some people who like doing that.
Yeah.
And so that's just not my idea of a good time or my idea of how I like to use my skill set.
Yeah.
So, I only worked with the police for maybe 3 years, and that was plenty. That was enough to get me a reputation. It was enough to get me to write the book. It was kind of like Trey said, you go in these directions, and when it's done, and you just keep moving. So that's how that worked. But it gave me a really solid reputation because the police validated the work. And so when you're going out to teach business people or entrepreneurs or CEOs, that gave me the ability to speak a language that was rooted in reality, right?
Mhm.
It's not waving crystals and talking to angels and chanting and stuff. It's like, here's the biology, here's how you get it to work, here's the results. And so it was really beneficial, but it wasn't a place where I wanted to hang out for a long time.
Yeah.
Just
It,
some scary people out there.
is the majority of work now with businesses, entrepreneurs, CEOs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's a lot more fun, right? Because there's a process of creativity and creation versus the process of murder and mayhem and death and rape and all that other stuff. So not my idea of a fun time.
Yeah, I don't think it is anyone's.
No.
Different
But
kind of energy.
there are psychic detectives who love it. They're like, ooh, we're going out to find a body. I'm like, see ya. Have fun.
So is this kind of stuff a lot more prevalent in society than we realize? Because if you're just in the mainstream current, you probably have no idea that there are intuitive advisors, there are intuitive coaches, this is just becoming mainstream as opposed to only in the spiritual community. For some reason, intuition doesn't have the negative connotation like the word psychic for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. Well, and actually, I'm just noticing how dark my screen is here, guys. If you can just bear with me, I'll go turn on a light. I feel like I'm sitting in front of in a seance or something.
Might as well be, right?
Right. Woo-doo, woo-doo. Hang on. Bear with me. Sorry, guys. Thank you for your, I didn't realize how dark it was. The reason, there we go. See, I have a face. Much better. The reason that intuition is so much more accepted is because people like Richard Branson, people like Oprah Winfrey, people like Warren Buffett, they all claim to use it, right? And so if those high performance kind of people at that level of success are saying, oh yeah, I use my intuition all the time, then people are more willing to look at that and go, oh, well, if Warren's using it and Richard's using it and the Opes is using it, well then maybe I can use it. Versus the psychic connotation has those ideas of like me, somebody sitting in the dark over a candle, and also, coming to the understanding that intuition is a natural skill. It's not a special gift. It's not supernatural. It's not paranormal. It's normal. It's natural. It's rooted in our DNA. And the sooner we accept that, and these leaders, Oprah and Branson and Buffett, are giving us permission to use it in that way. So they've kind of knocked the stigma off of it and are doing us all a solid by coming out of their own intuitive closet.
Yeah.
And you can be, let me see if I say this right. If your intuition is really active, you can be psychic. But if you're just because you're psychic doesn't mean you're necessarily intuitive, right? Intuition is a creative process, right? When you're using it well, right? It helps you create stuff. the ability to talk to dead people. It's like, that's kind of cool, but how is it going to serve me? I'm like, it's not a really, some people really like to be mediums and go and use that skill set in that way. I like to be able to use the intuitive skill set to create stuff, to make stuff, to shape stuff. So it's an aspect. Intuition is an aspect of psychic ability. Psychic ability is an aspect of intuition. Um, I just, for me, I want to be able to use something, a tool that's going to help me
Right.
create. Yeah.
But it's out there and it's real and it works
Yep.
when you can get the hang of it and move through the roadblocks that come with it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
The other thing you do is you work with, I guess you train mystics, modern mystics.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not even what it sounds like, because like I remember we had that conversation once, and John and I have talked about this too, about Kobe Bryant and how
Mm-hmm.
he's actually kind of a mystic. And a lot of athletes, I think, are kind of mystics without even realizing it, right?
Yep.
Could you kind of explain that a little bit? How athletes are kind of these magical. Does that make sense? Because they're manifesting this stuff, and they're like, I'm gonna make this 3-pointer. Well, how do you know you're gonna make the 3-pointer? I know, you know.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And I love Kobe Bryant as an example of a modern mystic, although he probably doesn't identify himself as one. And and the thing of it is modern mystics are hiding everywhere. They're not just sitting on meditation pillows or teaching spiritual classes. They are everywhere. But what I love about Kobe is, and if you haven't watched the documentary called Muse, Muse on YouTube, it's so good. But what it talks about is that from a very young age, Kobe knew he was going to play for the Lakers. He just knew it, and he lived in service to that vision, meaning everything he did in his life was in alignment with that knowing. And um, and and so he said, even himself, he said, when somebody asked him, well, were you surprised that you became a top ranked player for the Lakers? He said, no. He said, I carried that vision with me my whole life, so it became inevitable. It was inevitable. And when Kobe said it was inevitable, that's a mystical thought, because a mystic um, embodies the outcome, right? The healing, the transformation. They work from the end. They work from the end. So that the equation for a mystic is always energy plus information equals outcome. And if you hold that equation long enough, it's a principle. It's 2 + 2 = 4. It's not personal. It's a principle. And so if you hold that equation long enough, outcomes become inevitable. So it's just like, if I add 2 and 2, I'm going to get 4. It's just inevitable. So Kobe was playing in the mystical field his whole life. So when he did finally at 18 get his LA Lakers jersey, he was like, well, of course. And it wasn't rooted in ego. People gave Kobe a really hard time when he was young, saying, oh, this little shit disturber, he thinks he's all that, and he shows up and he wants to play first string, and his first year was a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why was his first year a disaster based on what we talked about earlier? Can you think, as we talked about the level of power, when you reach a new level of power, what's going to happen?
Did everything that was holding him back have to come up so that he
Yep.
could see it? Okay.
Yeah.
Because
So
he was
when
like
he was
airballing threes and like
yeah,
all the time.
yeah, and then when he got to the big leagues, all of that shit changed. And so in his first year, it was just, he was like, oh my God, and everybody was like, why did we pay this kid this? He's a hack. And it was because, just like in mystical training, when you raise your level of power, you're gonna face those shadows that haven't been processed. And so Kobe took that year, after that year of his disaster, he took the whole summer and the whole off season to practice and practice. He practiced like 12 hours a day, and he faced his demons, and he really went inward to say, okay, what am I so afraid of that I'm screwing this up? So he had his own sort of come to Jesus moment, but in a mystical way. And after that, his career just sort of took off. But Kobe is a wonderful mystical example. I love him as a mystic. It's awesome.
And I think I like him a lot because, like you said, a lot of spiritual people are giving away their power. When you're training in your body and you're an athlete, you're in your body. So you're
Yes.
grounded, right? And does
Yeah.
that make it, if we're in our bodies more, and if we're, I guess you could call it training, we're training our mind to be in our body in a way, are we?
Yeah. A lot of spiritual people leave their body and they think that it gives them more power to be hanging out in the ethers. And I say, well, if you're hanging out in the ethers, then you're not going to be able to ground anything. And if you can't ground anything, you can't create in the 3D. And so athletes are in their body. However, when they get to be really good, you've heard athletes talk about being in the flow, and they don't know how they make the shot. They don't know what happened in that moment, in that clutch moment. It's because they're in their body, but their mind is so still. They are so present that time stops, and they're able to take. You've seen those people take shots like from clear across the court, and it's almost like the ball stops time. That's a mystical process, right? The mind is so altered, but the body is so active that it collapses time and space. And that's when those really freaky shots happen. You're like, what did please hit the replay. What was that? Right? Somebody show me that in slow motion. And that's magic. Those are miracles. When mind mind is still and body is active, that's when those things happen.
So for like me and John, and we're not doing the athlete thing, but we want to be able to get in the zone. And it seems like Kobe practicing 12 hours a day builds up his belief. It changes his belief system in a way, right? So it's the building of the new habits is what's building the new belief system, which is what allows us to manifest basically any idea that we could have, as long as it's not too impractical. Is that a good way of explaining it?
Well, I don't think you need to be limited by the idea of anything being impractical.
Okay.
This project that I'm doing with NASA, for example, it's wildly impractical. So who cares, right? It's like, all right, impracticality is a concept of a limited mind. So now, of course, you are Trey, you are a man, you are however tall you are not going to be a ballerina for the Joffrey Ballet. Let's just face some realities, okay? As a 5'3" woman, I'm not going to be a basketball player for the Lakers. Clearly, there are some things that are, that would be considered impractical, right?
Okay.
But so how can you guys train yourself? So mystics go beyond belief. Mystics they kind of skip over belief. They go into knowing, right? And just sense the difference between if you believe something or you know something, right? Kobe had done so much mental practice that he knew he was going to be a Laker. He didn't believe it. He knew it. And and even when we say that word, right, you can feel a difference in the power of I believe something or I know it, right? And so part of our power when we're using our intuition or any of our mystical creative power is to get so familiar with the vision, so familiar with the outcome, and embody it so consistently that it overwrites belief. It doesn't even consider belief. It just overwrites it and goes into knowing. And that takes practice, right? So you, in your body, you embody the knowing. For example, in me developing this show for NASA, I go into a meeting with an artist or with a funder. We've got to raise over $1 million for the show, or talking to the people at Hubble, or talking to city councils to get properties. I go into those meetings knowing that the show is a success. It's done. It's done. And so I go in there with the knowing that in the time-space reality, the show is already complete and it's already finished, and it's been a huge monster success. So what I'm doing in my action is sort of semantic. And to walk into that knowing, with that knowing then influences the people around you. They feel it because they're intuitive too, right? They're like, right? They feel it. And so you can have a completely different conversation with an artist or a scientist or somebody who you need $1 million from. And they're going to feel the knowing in you and be more inclined to say yes to what you're doing, right? So I always say to people who are wanting to transform things, I say, let's not even play with belief. Belief is fine. Belief is fine. It's okay, but it's kind of wimpy. It's kind of flimsy. Let's just go straight to knowing, and make that knowing your practice, just like Kobe. And then you stand in service. You stand in service to the knowing. So everything you do, everything you say, how you wash your dishes, how you brush your teeth, how you speak to somebody is rooted in that being. So you practice and you practice and you practice, always in service to the vision. So whatever your vision is, whatever it is you're wanting to create, I always say be in service to the vision first, then you can be in service to others after, as a side effect of that, right? Because if you're, again, with intuition, you've got to give your intuition a strong target. And so if you're in service to the vision, you say, here's my vision, here's my goal, like an archer shooting an arrow at a target, right? Because there it is. Then your intuition will go like a laser beam, will aim at that vision and go, okay, here, let me line you up. And then as you take action, kind of like you said, over time, as you practice that, it starts to become ingrained and you kind of go, oh yeah, oh, this feels familiar. This feels good. This is awesome. And then how you are in service to other people comes as a byproduct of that, right? Because a lot of people get stuck in the idea of who am I going to be in service to and what is my purpose and how am I going to, what do I do and what do I do and how do I satisfy these people? And so your focus gets really scattered, right? But if you're in service to the vision, that's one focus and all these other things are a part of it, right?
It makes sense.
It makes total sense. I mean, when you think, and Troy, we've talked about this plenty of times, but like Steve Jobs, I think he was the perfect example of that too, fulfilling his vision.
Yeah.
You know, people were crazy and people thought he was crazy.
Yeah.
And he totally changed the way that we do things. I think even Mark Zuckerberg too has that vision too, and he changed things too. So it's just it's practical and it makes sense. It really does if you think about it.
Well, yeah, it is totally practical and it totally makes sense. And the most powerful things are practical and the most powerful things do make sense. But we get, and again, and I hate to bash the spiritual new age, but sometimes I just got to go, what are you talking about? That we complicate it, and it doesn't need to be that complicated. The answers are sitting right in front of you. And Steve Jobs isn't the only person. Like, who else? So, you know, Steve Wozniak, Elon Musk, you know, Wozniak wanted a computer
Albert
for
Einstein.
himself.
Yeah.
You know, Wozniak wanted a computer for himself first. It wasn't about putting a computer in every house until later. It was, what does he want for himself? Richard Branson was tired of being bullied, and so he started a magazine for himself, and then he called on his friends, and you know, it's kind of, you know, like Zuckerberg too. But these visions were their own personal visions first, and then the momentum of those visions captured everybody else's imagination, and that's then how it started to serve. But you know, every big business person that's been successful in recent years, Jessica Alba, right, a former actress who started the Honest Baby company, right? She wanted healthy products for her baby that became a business, and then she stood in service, right? You know, Jobs and those guys, and Branson, and so that's why I always say, and it's not egoic to serve the vision, right? You're serving something outside of you that has come from a higher inspired power. So you're in service to the vision. That helps you become really laser focused. And it also helps you get clear about what has value, right? How am I spending my time? Who am I spending my time with? Are these people in alignment with my vision? Nope. Bye-bye. right? And that's what helps catapult then that intuitive mindset, because it's such a strong target that you just become a laser.
So I guess maybe this is the last thing we talk about, John, but
Yeah.
So we talk, I mean, a little bit about spirituality on the podcast, and metaphysical stuff. How does knowing that there is like a larger part of you that knows it all, I mean, how do we make it? Because the goal is to make the Trey part of me connected to my higher self and just realize it's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about it's not egoic, but my ego always wants to kind of take credit for it sometimes. Or when something cool happens, it wants to be like, oh, look what I did.
Mm-hmm.
How do we notice things like that when cool things happen? Because they will. When we're messing with intuition, cool things are going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we have to normalize it too. But do we really even need to know that there's a higher self that's helping us? Or I guess it doesn't really have to be, because Kobe or people have done it without knowing that part of them existed, really, in a conceptual form.
What a good question. Do you need to know that it's there in order to have it work for you? No.
Yeah.
Is it helpful to know that it's there, to be able to partner with it in a meaningful way deliberately? Absolutely. Right. Kobe was able to do what he was able to do, and these other people were able to do what they were able to do. Quite, I don't want to say by accident, because there are no accidents, but it was just sort of an intuitive process. They knew what they wanted, and they, come hell or high water, they figured out a way to do it. The higher self, and I get what you're saying about this idea of, ooh, I did something really cool, and aren't I awesome, and you know, and that is common. That's common when it's new. It's common when it's new, right? It's like, ooh, I can drive a car. Look how cool I am. Aren't I special? But once you've driven the car for 15 years, it's like, yeah, just what I do. It's like, no big whoop. And so that aren't I special nature it'll go away. And I invite those days. It's like, okay, when it becomes not special, then that relationship with the higher self becomes more organic. And we don't want to get rid of Trey. We don't want to get rid of Simone. We don't want to get rid of John. Self, these, you know, Trey has preferences. John has preferences. John has things he likes. Trey has things he likes. Simone has things she prefers. Those things are essential to the process, right? So we want to be able to integrate Trey with the higher self, and that becomes part of the practice. So when you're in a position of really still mind and you're in flow, and you notice that the yammering in your head about anything is gone, you're like, ooh, and you're in the pocket, right? It's that moment of being an athlete when it's just, you're in the flow. It's like, oh, give me this, give me this, give me this. I want this, I want this. And the mastery comes in being able to catch yourself when you're in the flow, when you're in the pocket, and recognize it and go, okay, what am I doing right now that has put me in this place? And how do I do more of that? And then you'll pop out. And then you'll be all up in your head about, how do I do that again? And then you go, okay, what was I doing the last time I popped in? And then you recreate that. And then you get it, and then you're in the flow for 3 minutes. And then you're in the flow for an hour, and then you're in the flow for a day. That's mastery. Mastery is not being able to get into that flow and stay in it. Mastery is being able to get into the flow, pop out, then get yourself back in, and then pop out and get yourself back in without losing your shit.
Right.
That's mastery.
That's what it's about.
Right.
So would a good analogy be like, when we started driving the car, we're like, this is cool, but now when I drive the car, I put the key in and I go, and I don't really even, for better or worse, sometimes I don't remember how I got to where I get, because my body just navigates it flawlessly. It knows how to get there.
Yes. And it's the same with this. It's the same with this integration of you and your higher self. You've been living as Trey, like you said, and believing that Trey was who you really are. But there's this more exalted identity that is connected to the whole field and all of that other cliche stuff that is tapping you on the shoulder going, hey kid, come up here. And so I use the analogy of using the car analogy of driving a Yugo and driving a Ferrari, right? The machinery or the technique of driving a Ferrari, you need to be so much more precise. You need to be so much more present. You need to have so much more precision and awareness of yourself in a vehicle like that, or you're gonna drive into a wall. But you can get away with being kind of sloppy if you're driving a Yugo, and this is no judgment on anybody who might drive a Yugo. But you get what I'm saying. When there's higher levels of power, your levels of awareness and your levels of present moment need to be so precise.
Mm-hmm.
And then after a while, if you've driven the Ferrari for a while, it just becomes normal. You've mastered that level of power. And then you go to Formula One and you drive something that's, driven by rocket fuel. And so there's these constant layers and levels of power. And it just becomes a process. It becomes play. You know that higher level of yourself is there. And you know that it's trying it's saying to you all the time, hey kid, you want to try something really cool? Come up to this level of power. Let's go drive a fucking Ferrari. What do you think? And then you say to yourself, you go, okay, if I'm going to master that level of power, who do I need to be? How present of mind do I need to be? What nonsense do I need to let go of? What do I have to really seriously kick to the curb? And am I brave enough to do it? Right?
That last one.
Yeah.
Am I brave enough to do it? I'm going to, and I'm not joking when I say that my life is puppies, ponies, and Porsches. I'm going to the Porsche Experience track here in Los Angeles. I was supposed to do it at the end of January, but it's been raining here for 4 weeks, so I have to wait till the spring to do it. And, the experience of sitting behind the wheel of a Porsche and driving it at 160 miles an hour is vastly different than sitting behind the wheel of my Lexus, right? And the degree of presence that has to be there is so much more profound. And it's the exact same thing in dealing with these ideas of spirit. It's like, all right, you want you want this kind of power. First of all, it's going to scare the bejeebers out of you the first time or the first 20 times, but eventually it'll become normal. And that's when you go, okay, now what's next? And what's next? And what's next? So I encourage anybody to go test drive a really high performance sports car and feel the level of presence that you need to have so that you don't drive yourself into a wall. And that's a good way to sort of say, okay, this is how I tap into those higher levels of power.
Wow.
And yeah, it's fun.
Trey, you and I are gonna have to do that because they have the same thing in Atlanta. Do you have the Porsche Experience in Atlanta with the Porsche being headquartered here? Yeah.
Go do it. That will be and for anybody who's listening, and this too is a part of the fun of being a mystic. It's like, okay, how can I go into the real world and play with this and have it teach me? Like anybody who's, if I say I'm going to play with Porsches, they're like, well, that's not very spiritual. You're just being so very much in the material world. I'm like, go play with a Porsche and tell me that doesn't feel like frickin' spirit, right?
Yeah.
And so use those experiences and be curious about them and say, okay, how can I apply this to my intuitive practice? Race car drivers are very intuitive because they're moving at high levels of speed, faster than the mind can navigate, right? So they're in their intuitive set. They're in the intuitive mindset all the time. And the really good ones live there, even when they get out of the car. So the intuitive mind moves so much quicker than the thinking mind. And that's too why if you're ever in a car accident and you notice your mind shifts and everything moves in slow motion, right? That's a race car driver has to be in that position because matter is moving so quickly. Yeah, go test drive Porsches and then let me know how it went.
We'll have to do it. We'll have to do that.
Yeah.
Over
and then
here.
do a podcast about it.
Well,
we'll
we're
have
here
to
in the 3D. You might as well play with everything we can, right? Because we can't do it when we're spirit. Can't do it when we're
Yeah.
spirit.
Yeah. Yeah. And use every experience that the 3D throws at you and say, okay, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? The exalted, the profane, and the profound. And just like, okay, who am I being right now? If your apartment floods, and the second coming of Noah's Ark is happening here in Los Angeles, and like I said before our interview, I had to go and sandbag stuff because things were flooding, and said, all right, how can I be present in this so that I don't lose my marbles in this moment, so that I can be of service in an efficient way, and that becomes the play.
Right. I was actually about to ask you how we turn it into play, and then you just answered the question without me even doing it. So
Hey, how about
that's
that?
pretty
It must be intuitive.
right.
Yeah, yeah. And that also helps you navigate things more quickly and more elegantly, and be able to drive through them, again using the Porsche analogy, right? At the Porsche experience, they set you up so that you'll hit a skid, you'll hit a puddle of water and you'll skid. They'll deliberately shape a skid so that you're moving at high speed and you lose control. No, you don't lose control of the car. The car spins and you stay in control of the car. So how do you do that so that you can respond to what life is bringing you at high speed, and be able to stay so present that you can control the outcome without slamming into the wall, right? That's mastery. That's the gift of a mystic. That's where intuitive skill really comes online.
Awesome.
I like
And that appeals to the guys too, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, guys, go drive a sports car. That will get your intuitive mind, hi kitty, that will get your intuitive mind activated. And then your job is, while you're in the car driving at high speeds, to remember, okay, what is my mind doing right now? And that becomes a really great way to practice.
Cool.
Okay, so we're getting near the end, and thank you so much for coming on and doing this with us in the first place, and sharing this.
It's fun. I wish I was better. I wish I was better groomed, but like I say, I was on barn flood duty.
Meant to be. Do you have? Usually, we'll just kind of let the guests kind of close with whatever they want to share with the listeners going forward. And our listeners range from totally grounded business to metaphysical, so they're the messages can be whatever it is.
Well, I don't think those two things need to be separate.
Nope.
We need mystics in the boardroom. We need mystics in the operating room, and we I mean, this might piss some people off, and I don't really care. We don't need a planet full of spiritual teachers. We need mystics everywhere. We need mystical garbage collectors. So wherever you are at right now is perfect for your spiritual development. Life has put you where you are right now, and that is a perfect nurturing ground for your intuitive power, for your mystical power, for your service to whatever it is that you want. A lot of people think that they've got to give up everything in order to be in service spiritually. And for some people, that is true. For most people, it's not. You can bring spirit into where you are right now. And then what that does is it starts to alter the paradigm in situations, circumstances, cultures, businesses, enterprises that are distorted. So start wherever you are. Wherever you are right now is the perfect place for you. And then as it relates to this idea of remembering who you are, a mystic has profound curiosity. It's one of their superpowers. And they're always asking questions. And so as it relates to this idea of activating your intuition or developing your mystical power, start asking yourself that question. Okay, who am I really? Who am I really? Because when I was given the message, this is not who you are, you've got to remember who you are, the message didn't tell me. I had to figure it out. And it was that curiosity of saying to that question, okay, well, if this isn't who I am, my little skin suit, it's only a part of me, then who am I really? And in that question, again, you're giving your intuition a target, and it will start to show you. And it will show you how brave you are. It will give you opportunities to exercise your courage. It will give you opportunities to exercise your compassion. It will give you opportunities to exercise your sense of humor, because this is a fucking joke where we are right now. It's so funny. It's not funny. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. We could be less serious about it.
Yeah, because we're going to come back and do it again, and we're going to come back and do it again and again and again, and we've done it a million times before. And so to exercise that curiosity, okay, all right, who am I really? Intuition? Show me. And then brace yourself.
Yeah, and dropping belief systems, preconceptions, anything that can get in the way of curiosity at the same time, it sounds like.
Yeah. The mystical mind is empty.
I like that. The unconditioned mind, I think, is what you called it.
Yep.
The unconditioned mind.
It's very unconditioned. So it makes no snap judgments about anything. It doesn't define a category. It just is like, that's really interesting. And so when a mind is empty, spirit, intuition just goes, hello, this is where you want to go. There's nothing in the way. There's nothing in the way. And when there's nothing in the way, that's when miracles happen.
I like it.
Awesome.
Cool beans.
So what's the title of your book, and where can I buy it?
The title of my book is called First Intelligence, Using the Science and Spirit of Intuition. And it is available on Amazon. Okay. The global giant that is Amazon. Yeah. And you can also see more of my stuff at my website, SimoneWright.com. Okay. And
you have your own podcast too, right?
I do have I have my own podcast. I've got a mystical library with courses and online programs and audio programs and group coaching and individual coaching. And then my fine art is on there. And it's just a cacophony of mystical stuff.
Okay. Awesome. What's the website called?
SimoneWright.com. SimoneWright.com.
Okay. We'll put it in the links and stuff.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. Thank you so much.
Without you
coming on, we can't have this conversation to share with everyone and all of our listeners, and to help them grow in their own spiritual adventures too.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Well, and that's how it spreads, right? Mm-hmm. It's like a little virus from one to the other to the other to the other.
Mm-hmm. Let's spread it. Let's spread the intuition.
Let's spread it. Spread the virus. Cool. But thank you guys so much for having me. It's a real treat. And congratulations. Thanks, congratulations on the podcast and everything you guys are doing. It's really wonderful.
Appreciate it.
Very, very good stuff.
Keep keeping on.
Thank you for coming on.
You're welcome. My pleasure, guys. Bye.
All righty. Bye.
Bye, Simone.
Thank you.